Welcome, Hoosier fans, to another victorious edition of the Assembly Call. I am the student intern for the Assembly Call, Michael Dugan. I'm filling in for Jared Morris and everyone today. I'll be going solo, so if you guys have any questions, be sure to tweet the Twitter account at Assembly Call, and I will get to them throughout this broadcast. We're going to cut it a little shorter today. We'll be going less than an hour's time. We'll go until we can't do it anymore, and we're going to break down the Hoosiers' 83-73 victory over the Red Storm of St. John's, and it was definitely a step up from yesterday's performance. There were a lot of things wrong with how they played last night against Wake. Everything up to the final whistle, really. That final play was bad. They couldn't really play defense. They couldn't get a rebound. They turned it over too much, and Tom Crean decided to change that up right away today with a completely different starting lineup. He had Thomas Bryant in the center, Colin Hartman, Zeisloft, Farrell, and Robert Johnson made his way back in the starting lineup after coming off the bench this year. And all those guys played pretty well to start out with. Indiana started playing really hot, and they fed the ball to Thomas Bryant, which is huge. And I think that that's going to be a big deal going forward for them. I think if Thomas Bryant is the focal point of their offense, they can go almost anywhere. And that hasn't really been the case this season. They did it against Creighton to start out with, and that was pretty much the first time they did it. And it really showed. And their offense was growing and blossoming, every possession we could see. And Thomas Bryant going forward has to keep getting that ball, and he has to keep asking for it. And when he gets it, he's going to have to do something with it. And he's overpowered every big man he's faced thus far. But today he started out hot. He had 10 points right out of the gates. I believe he had 15 in the first half, if I'm not mistaken. And then he finished with 19. And two of those 19, so one of his two baskets, I believe, in the second half came with 30 seconds left, or just a dish down low from Yogi with the shot clock winding down and no one was on him. So, really you could say that he ended with 17 after starting with 15 relatively quickly. He was on pace for one heck of a day, but ended with just 19 points after that hot start and 3 boards. And Indiana let St. John's back into this ball game. And they did that when Farrell and Bryant stopped doing what they were doing. And they really slowed it down to begin with, and they looked more focused than usual. And we haven't really seen that from an Indiana team in a while. And when we do, it's kind of refreshing because we're so used to seeing them, book it up the court with Yogi and, dish it out for a quick shot or a quick look from 3-point or 20 feet or even inside every now and then. But it's very refreshing to see this team kind of slow it down and move at a pace, but not really, too slow. They still have got a little, kick in their step, but it's never really too slow, and it's not really blazing quick all the time. And guys don't have to come out and sub out that often, so it's a huge plus, even though there is depth on this team with Bielfeld and Williams and Blackman coming off the bench today. And then Robert Johnson's very capable when he usually comes off the bench, or has been. We'll see going forward. But this is a pretty deep team at positions 1 through 3, maybe even 4. And they can afford these substitutions, and they like to go quick. But the reality is the talent is just not quite there for them to play with anyone and everyone moving at that pace. And the only team that can really do that in basketball is the Golden State Warriors. And Yogi Ferrell's not Steph Curry, and Robert Johnson's not Klay Thompson. And, we could get into that discussion. But they don't have the talent that a team needs in order to move that quickly and succeed on a game-to-game basis. So they are going to slip up if they continue to move that quick. But today it was awfully refreshing to see them slow it down and, run an actual offense instead of trying to, book it down and get a quick shot, which has worked in the past. Don't get me wrong there. But there were a lot of things that we saw today that we hadn't really seen in the past, and it was nice to see. And Thomas Bryant in the beginning, Indiana jumped out to an almost 20-point lead in the first half. And that's something we hadn't really seen thus far, except for that Creighton game. And Creighton's their, only real opponent thus far heading into the Maui Invitational. And what we saw there was a team that's ready to win. And they were on the right track. They weren't quite there because Thomas Bryant was still young and still is. But what we saw there was a team that was ready to take the next step into almost the top tier of college basketball. And these last 2 games, they've started to digress a little bit. And that could be concerning going forward. But for now, it's a good starting point. But they need to continue to feed the ball to Thomas Bryant, or this team will only go as far as he will take them. And if he's not getting the ball, if he's not really the focal point or one or two focal points of that offense, it's going to be a problem. And there's no doubt that, guys like Robert Johnson and Yogi Ferrell and Troy Williams and even James Blackman can make plays with the ball. And you can trust guys like Blackman and Williams and sometimes even Robert Johnson when they have the ball up top by themselves. But the pressure has always been on Yogi to make the plays. And while he is capable of doing that, he can't do it for the full 40 minutes. And Tom Crean has started to realize that there's Thomas Bryant now, and we can start to work the offense through him. And over the course of the first 3 games at home against Eastern Illinois, Austin Peay, and then Creighton, every game, it seemed as though every 4-minute stretch between media timeouts, Thomas Bryant was getting the ball more often. And that was a huge step forward for the Hoosiers. And I think they need to continue doing that if they want to win. And they stopped today for some reason. And Bryant had the ball and put up a lot of shots in the first 20, 25 minutes. And then he came out. He came out and the offense started to go back to their usual ways. And St. John's crept back into the game. They went on a 15-3 run, I believe, to start the second half to the under 16 timeout. And they got right back in the game. This game was in Indiana's control for the first 20 minutes. And they changed whatever they were doing offensively. Thomas Bryant got less action down low. He was kind of standing there getting himself open, and the looks were there. But Indiana sped it up a little bit. And I don't know why you would do that, especially with the lead that they had. Now, looking more on the positive side, this team has a lot of talent and so many shooters that can knock down the open three. And they did that yet again today. And they shot 42% from beyond the arc. Robert Johnson hit a pair. James Blackman hit 2. Yogi was 1 of 3. Hartman struggled, was 1 of 4. Those were his only 4 field goal attempts. But Bielefeld and Troy Williams put 1 through each. And Williams coming off the bench, Tom Crean tried to get a spark there. And only ended with 7 points, but he had 9 rebounds. He was ferocious on the glass today. He was absolutely ferocious. I was very impressed with him, and he needs to continue to do that going forward. And in my opinion, if Indiana wants to succeed this year and become a Big Ten contender, the season starts right now. There's Duke a week from tomorrow, and they're not going to be able to play with the Blue Devils if they can't feed the ball to Thomas Bryant. When they did that in the preseason in those 2 exhibition games, and then the first 3 games with that Creighton game being that main focal point, as I said, I was so high after that Creighton game on the Hoosiers. I almost can't put it into words, but they digressed yesterday, and they stopped doing what they were doing. And today they completely changed it, and the starting lineup worked fine. They got out to a hot start. They were shooting well, and Thomas Bryant was the focal point of that offense. And it's a great feeling when you see a guy like that, a freshman who's capable of scoring and getting boards like Thomas Bryant is. And Yogi Ferrell, I know, is the leader of this team, and no one's going to disagree with me there. That's just fact. And he's going to have to learn at some point that Thomas Bryant is going to eventually be the main guy offensively for the Hoosiers. At least, in my opinion, that's how the Hoosiers are going to succeed, is if the ball can be fed to him, because he's shown already. He's played in, 7 college games, if you include the exhibitions, and he's been able to make plays. And he's done it very well. And he's scored, and he's gotten rebounds, and he's out-muscled guys. And he's a young guy. He's a baby in the college game. And it's very, it's good and refreshing to see a guy that can take over games like he can with the supporting cast that he has. This is one of the most talented teams in the country, just based off of pure talent. And it's going to take some time for them to finally figure it out, for everything to just click. And it may never happen, because it's kind of a confusing team, because you've got guys that can take over in isolation, and Troy Williams, and you could argue James Blackman and Yogi Ferrell. But at the same time, you've got all your attention that needs to be fed down low to the big man. And it's going to take Crean and the Hoosiers some time to figure this out. And today was a great great stepping stone in figuring that out, because in the beginning, that's exactly what they did. They focused on the big man, and it worked. And they jumped out to a 16, 18-point lead, whatever it was. It was enough. And St. John's crept up right back into this game, and they got it within a couple possessions. And there was a part of me that was saying, "Oh my, this is this is falling right before our eyes." And at about the 4-minute mark, I noticed Yogi Ferrell and Thomas Bryant were both out of the game. And Bryant finished with 3 fouls, Yogi with 2. So they weren't in foul trouble, but they were on the bench. I believe there was Zeisloft, Bielefeld, Williams, Blackman, and Robert Johnson. But I'm not sure. But I know Bryant and Farrell were not in the game, and that can't happen when this team is coming back on you and there are 4 minutes left in the game. It can't happen like that, and that's never, ever going to work. And your team needs to hold a lead, and you need to get the 2 playmakers that you have and the 2 guys that run your offense in the game. So that's what I saw today. There were a couple of red flags that I saw, like I just said. Those guys need to be in the game late, and Bryant needs to be fed the ball more. If it's working, why stop? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And Crean at one point in the second half just decided to stop doing that and play their old ways, which it's caught up to them. And teams take notice of what Indiana's doing. And what they're doing is playing quick. And it is so hard for teams to keep up with Indiana when they're playing well. But on those off nights, which come far and few between, but on those off nights, it's tough for Indiana to get back into a game with them just cruising up the court looking for an open 3. And that's something that they need to look out for going forward. If there's an open 3 in the beginning of the possession, take it, because those guys can knock it down. There are 4 guys in that lineup that can knock it down, no doubt about it. But you can't keep forcing threes. And they haven't really forced a ton of threes, but they've taken them way too early in the shot clock, and it's been kind of concerning. And it hasn't been to the point where it's catastrophic yet, but it's something that needs to be taken note of and something that needs to be looked at going forward. It's just something that may have to change at some point. But eventually, I believe, come mid-January, beginning of February, right in time for the Big Ten tournament, that this team will be a well-oiled machine. And Thomas Bryant will be getting the ball in almost every possession. But, against a team like Maryland or a Duke like next week, or Wisconsin, Ohio State, Michigan, what have you, Michigan State with Denzel Valentine, this team is not going to win with just its guards. College basketball is a game dominated by guards, but you've got to have a big man. You look at the last national champions, Duke, Jahlil Okafor, Kentucky had Anthony Davis. Wisconsin last year in the national championship had good guards, but Frank Kaminsky was their anchor there. And that's what Indiana needs out of Thomas Bryant, is they need him to be their anchor. And he is getting there, and he will be. And it's next to impossible to ask your freshman to be the anchor 6, 7, 8 games into the season. So the fact that he's not there yet is the least of my concerns. It should be the least of everyone's concerns in Hoosier Nation. But at some point, he needs to be the focal point of that offense. And they'll get there, but it's just a matter of when. And how they get there is going to be very important, and it may tell how they play once they do get there. If they get there by just slowing it down and taking it up and doing something we haven't seen before, then could be interesting. That'll be a whole new Indiana, and we're not going to know what to expect. If you take today for it as an example, then it could be a good thing, because they had, it was 36-18 at one point, maybe. I don't know exactly the score, but it was ugly early when they slowed it down and they were in the zone, they were focused, and they were setting screens, and the backdoor cuts were there, and Bryant was asking for the ball, and Farrell was finding him and looking for him and going out of his way to look for him and stuff like that. And that's what's going to really help the Hoosiers going forward, is looking for Thomas Bryant and making the offense revolve around him. And they're capable of winning some games if they don't do that. But when it comes to Big Ten play, they need to look at that Creighton game, and they need to look at the first half today. So going forward tomorrow against what's likely going to be a UNLV team that's not terribly strong, but they're very capable of burning you, that'll be a nice chance for them to try this out again, is to try not even necessarily this starting lineup, but try what they tried, you know, in the beginning, in the first half, and have Bryant down low and just feed him the ball and see what he can do, because the guy barely missed. He was 7 for 9. He got to the line, took 7 shots. But the only thing that, was a little concerning was his rebounding ability, but he only had 3 of them. But he's getting shots up, and that's what matters. And other guys in Indiana can rebound, like Troy Williams had 9. Yogi Ferrell's one of the best rebounders on the team. He only had 4, but that guy's a grinder. He'll hustle if you need him to, and he'll go get those boards. But Bryant needs to be the leading rebounder, and if not that, the one behind the leading rebounder. And he wasn't that today, and that could be a partial reason of why this game was close pretty much until the end. It was only a 10-point final, but this game was pretty close when it really shouldn't have been. The final score was much closer than the largest deficit, and that can't happen for the Hoosiers. That just can't happen, and they have to stop turning the ball over. They had 16 turnovers. That's a major red flag going forward, and they seem to play in stretches. And there are so many stretches where they're just feeling it. And most of them come at home where they feed off that energy and they just come out firing and they find the open guy. The guy knocks it down, crowds into it, and they get a stop. They knock down another one, and it's 10-2 already. Other teams got to call a timeout. And that's the Indiana we know. And that's what this team is capable of, because they have playmakers left and right. They have playmakers that can come off the bench. They had 2 playmakers come off the bench today in Williams and Blackman, and they still won. And Williams and Blackman still played pretty well. Williams had 7 points. Blackman had 12. They both shot over 50%. They didn't get to the free throw line. James Blackman got there on an and one, missed the free throw. So that's got to happen. They've got to get to the line more. They got to stop turning it over. But everything will fall into place eventually once they get into a rhythm of feeding Thomas Bryant down low. We're going to look to Twitter for some questions, and they're coming in already. And wow, there are plenty. There are plenty. And Travis Crow at TA Crow hit us right away and said, is #IUBB good? Are the Hoosiers good? And obviously you can answer this question and dodge a bullet with a simple yes or no. But this is a question I'd like to look into. And I noticed this right away. And Travis, thanks for your question. That's a great question. And that's an endless debate that we may not have the answer to until March or February. And it's open to interpretation, obviously. But I would say yes, because if you want to look at a team that's good, every team that's good has playmakers. In any sport, you look at the NBA, who's good? The Warriors. Who do they have? The best shooter of all time in Steph Curry. NFL, who's good right now? Panthers, Patriots. Tom Brady, Cam Newton. Great quarterbacks, 2 of the best in the league. You look at college basketball last year, who was good? Duke, Jahlil Okafor. Wisconsin, Frank Kaminsky. Kentucky, Karl Anthony Towns, Willie Cauley-Stein, the Harrisons. Who's good on Indiana? Is Indiana good? Who do they have? Yogi Ferrell, great player, incredible point guard, hustler, grinder, gamer, shooter, scorer, rebounder. Incredible. Troy Williams, playmaker, scorer, rebounder. James Blackman, scorer. Thomas Bryant, scorer. Indiana has the pieces. Indiana has the pieces. There's no doubt. They are one of the most talented teams in the country, bar none to me. Bar none. You look at Duke, mostly freshmen. Kentucky, too early to tell, mostly freshmen. They have a big win. Michigan State is proven. Indiana these players are proven, but the team is not. So Travis, to answer your question, I would say that this team is made up of good players, and they are very capable of not being good, but being great. And we've seen flashes of it, but we haven't seen it in its full glory yet. And I would love to, as much as the next guy, don't get me wrong. But this team they're so close, and they have been for over a year now. And it all starts with Thomas Bryant and Yogi Ferrell, because those are the 2 leaders offensively. You can't deny that. I feel like a broken record, keep saying this. But Thomas Bryant will take this team as far as he wants to go. If this guy wants to be the hardest worker in the weight room and in the gym, then this team, the possibilities are endless. If Yogi Ferrell wants to take 20 shots a game, they'll be good, but they won't be great. You've got to utilize your greatness. And you have potential greatness in Thomas Bryant. He's not yet proven, but he's got great potential. He has an extremely high ceiling. And Yogi Ferrell is a proven point guard. That guy can get to the hoop. He can knock down an open three. James Blackman can do the same thing. Troy Williams can do the same thing. He doesn't have as great of a jump shot as Yogi and Blackman do. You could argue that. But he can get to the rim like nobody's business. And so can Yogi. I mean, we see these times when Indiana, whoever they're playing gets on a run. Yogi just takes the inbound and looks like he just makes it look easy. He just gets down and scores. And haven't quite seen that yet this year. The season's still young. We're 5 games deep, but we haven't seen it yet. And I'd love to see it. And it could be great, and this team can be special. Trust me, the potential is there, and this team can go as far as they want if everyone starts to click. Now, they're 4-1. Not a lot of teams are 4-1 right now, and they do have that bad loss against Wake Forest, but they can improve on this. It's not like they're 2-3, but it's also not like they're 6-0 and they've beaten, Kansas or North Carolina, who have both gone down this year. But they have a chance to prove themselves against Duke. And they have UNLV likely next, not set in stone, but likely. They've got UNLV, and then they've got Alcorn State next Monday. And then they travel to Durham, and they have Duke. And that game and it's not going to, but it very well could define their season. And you know what I'm about to say. Thomas Bryant, if he can prove to us and prove to the nation that he's as capable a big man as the Hoosier Nation has seen so far, that Duke game could be very winnable. And I'm very excited to see what happens going forward, but it starts tomorrow with UNLV. And that has to be a win, because if they lose that game, they're in a lot of trouble. But that game has to be a win, and I see it as a very winnable game, obviously. But looking back on today, the first 18 minutes, almost 20 minutes, we'll call it the first half, were absolutely brilliant. And Indiana put up 42 points in the first half. And they didn't even really have to push the ball. Now, if you have to push the ball and you score 42 because you get a couple threes late in the game, that's one thing. But when a team like Indiana, who traditionally plays quick, slows it down, focuses, gets the ball down low, and if it's not there, kick it out for an open three, which is, in my opinion, how they should be running the offense, which is just a slight change in what they're doing now. It's not that big of a task. But if they could do that, a team that traditionally moves quick, this team could do anything. I mean, they scored 42 points moving slower than they usually do. That's impressive. And that's not to say that they can score, 50, 52 and a half with consistency if they move quick, because that's next to impossible against a very capable team like St. John's, who's very well coached, and first-year coach Chris Mullen, and they've got a lot of talent. But going forward, this team has got to slow it down like they did today. And I know that may be jumping the gun on my part, but I'm a fan of what I saw today. And if they can continue to produce like they did, that they could beat anyone. They can beat anyone. They can beat Maryland. They can beat Purdue. They can beat Michigan State. They can beat Duke. Even though it's in Cameron Indoor, they can win that game. And Thomas Bryant is very capable of scoring. He's a big dude. And most centers in college basketball these days are not that big. It's, the size is starting to go down. And, you don't find a lot of guys that are 7 feet and have the athletic ability of a 6'8", 6'9" power forward. And that's what Thomas Bryant has. And he likes to take these jump shots, and he's taken a couple threes. He hasn't knocked a ton of them down, but clearly the kid's got confidence in his shot. So, if he can slip out and take a couple jump shots, or if he can, stay down low and knock down those easy 4-footers and just put it over someone, his hook, or just throw it down, yes, this team can be good. And if Yogi Ferrell can create plays and drive and kick like he is very capable of doing, then yes, this team can be good. And going back to Travis's question, right now this team is good. But if you ask me or any diehard Hoosier fan, we're not looking for good. This is a team that this is supposed to be the year. And this is the most talent this team has had since that 2012-2013 team with Zeller, Oladipo, Farrell, Halls, and Christian Watford. And we're not seeing that same type of production. By this time that year, they were hyping up, to play that Kentucky game. Or that was 2011. 2012 at this time, they were blowing through everyone. They were the best team in the country for almost the whole year. And they beat Michigan twice. And that was a good Indiana team. That was a great Indiana team. And this team is capable of doing that. And I'm not saying Troy Williams is as capable as Victor Oladipo or Thomas Bryant's as capable as Cody Zeller. But Yogi Ferrell is a much better player. James Blackman has a more all-around game than Jordan Hulls did. And there's just more pieces there. There are more pieces. They don't have the sharpshooters like Hulls and Sheehy and whatnot, but they don't need that because this has the potential to be a new-look Indiana team that could change the game. And I'm very much looking forward to see what they have in mind and see what they can do. Denver Helton tweets in, at Denver Helton, with a question saying, Zeisloff didn't attempt a single three-pointer and had only 2 points. How can his lack of presence affect the Hoosiers' offense? Well, Denver, thanks for your question. Zeisloff today wasn't really needed because guys like Yogi had 22 and Thomas Bryant jumped on the board early, and there was consistency throughout the bench in Bielefeld, Williams, and Blackman. But Zeisloff needs to take more shots. And he didn't have a lot of open looks today, so I think we should credit the St. John's defense on that. And they were hustling all game long. They only had 8 guys checking the game, and they were hustling and closing out and stuff like that. But going forward, you're correct. Zeisloff needs to take more shots, but we also need to create more open looks. So with the approach that Tom Crean and the Hoosiers took in this game in feeding Thomas Bryant down low and focusing it around that, then Zeisloff's not going to get a lot of looks unless the defense collapses and, all hands on deck and trying to stop Thomas Bryant. But going forward, Zeisloff does need to make a couple more shots and take a couple more threes, which he didn't have a single one today. He and Thomas Bryant and Juwan Morgan were the only ones that can say that. But as a team, I think that they took the perfect amount of threes today. 19 attempts, they had 8 makes, which is fine. I'll take that. It's not great of an Indiana team that we've seen, but it's fine. It's fine, especially considering how they approach the game. But, to answer your question directly, he needs to have more of a presence. And today is not really fair in judging him because there weren't a lot of opportunities because their defense was pretty zeroed in on stopping the three. But and that's how St. John's came back, is that they were focused on stopping the three defensively, and then Indiana resorted back to taking those jump shots and resorting back to the Hoosiers of old that is inconsistent but dominant when it works. But yeah, I think Zeisloff needs to be taking more shots going forward. And that may come based off the matchup and who gives him more looks and who gives him less looks and stuff like that. But great question, and thank you for your question. And you had another question, actually. It says, if Thomas isn't in, what other big guy is most effective, Bielefeld or Morgan? And to be honest with you, when Thomas isn't in, the game plan changes completely because Bielefeld and Juwan Morgan's just a freshman, and Bielefeld's not as physical, not as athletic, not as big as Thomas Bryant. So they can't really go big, and they can't feed him down low, and they can't expect the same success. So when Thomas Bryant has to come out, which is going to happen, he's a freshman, he can't play all 40 minutes. It's not possible. But when he comes out, this offense needs to start moving quickly. And I know that kind of contradicts what I've been saying, but this offense needs to start moving quickly, and they need to be back to the Indiana of old. And Yogi Ferrell needs to get to the hoop, and he needs to kick it out to Zeisloff or Bielefeld or Williams or Blackman or even Robert Johnson, because those are all guys that are very capable of hitting an open three. And it all starts with Yogi when Bryant's on the bench. So when you say when Bryant comes in, which big man needs to be more effective, I don't think that we have to look to a big man to fill in his spot, because when Bryant comes out, that takes out a whole dimension of the game, and that's completely gone for the Hoosiers. And it's tough for them to win with Bielefeld trying to play like Thomas Bryant, you know what I'm saying? And no one can really duplicate his ability on this team. He's got a ton of talent, and no one can really duplicate that. So it's tough. So to answer your question, when Thomas Bryant comes out of the game, look no further than the guards. When Thomas Bryant comes out, the guards need to take over that game, and it starts with Yogi Ferrell. And there's no doubt about that. He's been the leader of this team for 2 years now. He's been a 4-year starter, and that's just what it comes down to, because no one can replicate what Thomas Bryant can do for this team. And if you can't do that, why try? Just stick to your guns here. They've got great guards, and Blackman and Williams at the 3, and Yogi at the 1, and Robert Johnson coming off the bench or starting wherever he comes from. And on that note, Denver, you had a third question, and thanks for listening. Thanks for paying attention today. And you say, what was Tom Crean's thinking on sitting Williams and starting Johnson? And that's a great question. Maybe he just wanted a fresh start because they didn't really – yesterday they couldn't pull away from Wake. And, there were a couple runs back and forth where they started to look like it might end one way, like Indiana might pull away and finish it, or Wake might pull away and finish it. So I think that it was just a change of momentum. It was nothing more than a tactical change, which Robert Johnson is very capable. I mean, he came off the bench last year as the first guy. He started a couple games, and he's a very capable player, and he can knock down an open look. And he was 2 for 4 from beyond the arc, so he's confident in his 3-point ability. And he had 4 assists. He had 1 turnover, and he takes care of the ball. And that's what I love about Robert Johnson. I've loved him since the first time I saw him last year. And I got a good look at him in the Big Ten tournament last year, and I loved what I saw. And I think, obviously there's Troy Williams, and there's James Blackman, and there's Yogi Ferrell. But going forward, Robert Johnson is not a bad 4th guy, to go find a scoring opportunity. And he's very capable of doing that. He can put the ball on the floor and drive as well as anyone on this team, with exception to Yogi, because he's not as fast. But, he's a strong player. He's a smart player. He sees the court well, and he makes smart passes, and he takes open shots when they're there, and he doesn't really force much. So he might be one of Indiana's smartest players. And he doesn't take a lot of risks, which is fine because the turnover count is high enough as it is. But I love Robert Johnson, and I would not be upset if he started more games here on out. Now, with that being said, I don't mean to knock on Troy Williams, because he's a phenomenal player, and he had 9 boards, and he was the reason that Indiana won this rebounding duel with them and St. John's. Because Yankuba Sema for St. John's had 7 boards. He schooled Thomas Bryant on the boards. He out-rebounded him 7-3, and he grabbed 5 offensive rebounds. That can't happen. You can't have anyone grab 5 offensive rebounds on you. That can't happen. You're not going to win if you get out, if they keep having second chance points. But Robert Johnson coming off the bench is fine. Robert Johnson starting is fine, because what we miss with Troy Williams is his ability to make plays. And Yogi Ferrell can still do that. And Robert Johnson can still do that. And James Blackman can still do that. With Hartman and Zeisloft in the lineup, it's less of an offensive threat than if you had Blackman or Williams or Johnson. But, this was nothing more today. He may do the same thing going forward, because I liked, and I'm sure everyone liked what they saw today from Indiana to start off in the first half. But going forward, it'll be interesting to see how he gauges that, because both guys have their pluses and minuses. And that's just what it was today. It was just a tactical change. And he may do the same thing going forward. But Troy Williams came off the bench with a lot of energy and had 9 rebounds. And how can you argue that? If he can do that off the bench, why try it again? Why put him back in? But, then again, you're thinking, okay, it's Troy Williams. It's Troy Williams. How can we bench Troy Williams? It worked today. It may not work going forward against Duke, in games where you want to start hot, like Duke next week, Michigan State, Maryland, Purdue, games where you need to start hot. It may not work because you need him on the floor. But today it worked fine. And I expect that to be the case going forward. I expect Troy Williams to start, and I expect Robert Johnson to come off the bench as the first or second guy. I hope, because I think he's the next best guy that's not in that starting lineup. I take him over Zeisloft. But, it's not a bad problem to have. Depth is not a bad problem to have. And that's exactly what the Hoosiers have. And that's what they need to use to their advantage going forward. So when Bryant comes out, shuffle guys in and out. Keep shooters on the floor, keep playmakers on the floor. Go small. They can go small and win games. They've done it in the past, and they can do it now. So go small, score, get to the boards, get the rebounds, push it up court, get an open look. That's what it's going to take for the Hoosiers. So, again, a pretty good team effort today. Second half was not what we expected, and it wasn't great. But going forward, this team is very capable of winning almost any game. So I'm excited to see what this week has in store, what UNLV likely tomorrow, maybe Chaminade. You never know. Chaminade's due for an upset every now and then. Back in 2012, they beat Texas in this very tournament. So you never know. So don't necessarily root for the underdogs here. But tomorrow the Hoosiers will face a tough opponent, and an opponent that's going to give them the full 40 minutes. Hopefully no more, but it's going to take the full 40 minutes from Indiana if they want to win this game. And the sad reality is, right now, to me, the Hoosiers are in an identity searching phase. And they found it. They found their identity early, especially, and that's so impressive and so huge with a freshman center in your starting lineup who's the focal point of your offense, which is impressive in itself. But it's so impressive that they found their identity already. And all they need to do is just execute. It's that simple. It's there. They've got not a marquee opponent tomorrow in whoever they face, and then they've got Alcorn State on Monday. And if they can impress me and win convincingly and click on offense, who knows? Who knows what could happen? But going forward, these next 2 games are going to be huge to see what they do going into that Duke game. And I know that's marked on everyone's calendars, and you always want to focus on the next game. But looking forward, obviously, these next 2 games are very winnable, and that's their marquee game out of conference. No doubt about it. That's their marquee game. And their season could jump straight up and sway up, or it could take a hit in that game. So today was the beginning of the preparation for that game, and that game is what they should use and what they probably will use to establish their identity. And they've started to do it again, and it's Thomas Bryant. Thomas Bryant. He is their guy. Will be for the season in all likelihood. Things could change. You never know. I can't tell the future. But going forward, Thomas Bryant's going to be the focal point of this offense, and that is how this team plays best. No doubt about it. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks for the Twitter questions. Thanks for helping me out here going solo. Everyone's busy during the Thanksgiving break. I hope everyone has a happy Thanksgiving, spends time with family. Thanks for tuning in. And until next time, go Hoosiers.